SciAnts. We get experimental science. We're curious, non-judgmental.
They use the acronym BMI in the paper, and it drove me up the wall reading it because that is not what I think about when I hear BMI. I think of like a weight thing, not a computer system. So DT, there is some AI here. There is some AI. Instead of what essentially you do, DT, and they did in this study, and we'll again go into a little bit more of it, is that they hook a rat's brain up to a sensor. And what they have is they are looking in the hippocampus of the brain of the rat. And that is the learning and memory center of this animal. It's the learning and memory center of your brain as well, DT. And what they do is they train the animal to do a particular task where they go from one site to another, and they're looking for some kind of reward. And in this case, it was water. So they essentially dehydrated the animals and then gave them this task of like, find the water. And they trained them multiple times to associate when they get to this particular site, they hear a sound and then they get to drink some water. And so they are able to have, like, look at the neurons, see what neurons are firing. So they take that data of how the rat moves around that arena and what the brain cells are when they're firing, and tie it to an AI-based approach. They want to figure out what are the patterns behind seeking out the water in terms of physical movements and neuronal firing. And so that's what they're trying to do. And so there is AI here, DT. And then what they do, DT, so after the rat has figured out this, they then, so like here's the trial up here, like this is their setup. You know, trial 1, trial 2, you run back and forth. The algorithm learns what the rat's movement is and what neurons are firing so that you can predict it in the future. Cool. Now, DT, they put the rat on a ball and it can run around on the ball, but it doesn't actually go anywhere. So think of the ball as like a treadmill, but it's one that you can move 360 degrees, right? You can move forward, you can move backward, you can move whatever, but their head is immobilized. And then with that head immobilized, you're still looking at the neurons that are firing. And this virtual reality arena that the rats are in, and what they do is, it's essentially the same as the first experiment where they have the two trials of where the rats are running to. But instead of the animal actually being able to physically interact with those items, it has to run in this virtual arena that looks the same as where it was trained. If you are fixed to a given location, and you can only spin around like you're in a chair, and you can do the circle spin, and only with your brain can you move forward. It's almost like the analogy they're making is you have to imagine the region in front of you. You have to think about, I want to get there, and you have to have certain neurons firing in order to move you there and forward. And so that's what what they're doing here. The first experiment is they actually have the physical arena, and they can free run. The second experiment is where they have the ball in the virtual arena, and they move by running on the ball, and that moves their location in the virtual arena. The third experiment is where the ball is fixed except for the ability to spin, and they can only move in the virtual arena by thinking of the region they want to move to. So it's a 3-step process to get to the idea that these animals have imagination. The quote from the professor running it is that the rat can indeed activate the representation of places in the environment without going there. Even as his physical body is fixed, his spatial thoughts can go to a very remote location. To imagine is one of the most remarkable things that humans can do. Now we have found that animals can do it as well. Yeah, so it's a projection of the environment. So their argument, Smikes, is that environmental projection is in fact the same thing as imagination. Did they just replace the visual reality with virtual reality? Yes, they have the exact same setup in the virtual reality. It's the same visual information coming in that you had from a real setup. How is that imagination if they are just tricked by a fake picture? Cliff right now is like, Blunt, this is insane. And when the mouse is immobilized and not moving, so it cannot physically go to an area, if certain neurons start firing, the VR automatically moves to the region that it expects the animal should be at. Right? So what that means, that's that imagination jump, where if the animal is like, oh, I'm thinking about like being at that area, the VR automatically moves them to that area. Maybe it's just me, it's kind of wild. I get it in principle, but it's still baffling to me that it works. Why the heck does this count as imagination? So Part of this is evolutionarily based. So there have been studies where in humans, I have a video on it too, but if you remove a human hippocampus, we can't imagine things anymore. Like your imagination goes out the window. And that's one of the reasons why they decided to look at the hippocampus in particular, because there does seem to be a connection with human imagination, which, is maybe pretty freaking cool, right? It's, again, like I was saying, I didn't think that this was a straightforward paper, but it's really fascinating. And again, the whole point of that paper was bringing us ever closer to proving that rats might have imagination. But the technology used in the study, I think, quite reliably demonstrates that the technology can be used in a lot of different features and factors as well, which I think is really cool. With that, y'all, I think we're going to round out the night.